In this vlog, our team will focus on the following research question. What are gun control regulations in Germany and in the UK, and how do they translate into gun deaths? Our research question is a comparative one, addressing the differences and resemblances between gun control regulations in Germany and the UK. The second part of our question is also a comparative one, but it is a statistical and not a legal one.
In Germany, the possession of firearms, munitions, and other types of weapons is regulated by the German Weapons Act. The Act regulates the use of weapons and ammunition in regards to the concerns of public security and order. The Act defines weapons as guns or equivalent objects and portable objects which are capable of reducing or removing humans' ability to attack or defend. Other relevant weapons are defined in Annex 1 to Section 1. Chapter 2, Portable Items. Portable items include cutting and thrust weapons, which are basically designed to inflict injury by using direct muscle power to cut, thrust, stab, hit, or throw, as well as irritant sprays, crossbows, and slingshots. Pursuant to Annex 2, Part 1, fully automatic weapons, along with weapons of war, are banned. Exceptions are made for semi-automatic weapons, which look like weapons of war. The ownership of more than 3 semi-automatic long firearms and more than 2 multiple-shot firearms requires a statement providing proof of the need for the applicant possessing more firearms from the applicant's shooting association. Pursuant to Section 35, Paragraph 1, ammunition has to be stored separate from firearms in a firearm safe. Young persons and children are allowed to handle and receive firearm instructions under Section 3 when the authorities deem it appropriate, which also bestows young people and children with the right to carry irritant sprays. In order to obtain any firearm in Germany, a license is required. There are different licenses for different purposes. To be eligible for a license, it is necessary to demonstrate to the relevant authorities proper specialized knowledge and need for the firearm in question. To demonstrate specialized knowledge, it is mandatory to pass tests and shooting examinations which examine the applicant's aptitude in the handling of firearms before the relevant authorities. As to demonstrating need, the applicant must prove personal or economic interest under stipulated categories: hunter, marksman, traditional marksman, collector of weapons or ammunitions expert, endangered person, weapons manufacturer, weapons dealer, or security firm. Thereafter, the firearm he seeks the license for must coincide with the purpose of one of the categories. Furthermore, the applicant needs to prove his reliability and personal aptitude. Persons deemed statutorily unreliable include persons who have been sentenced in a non-appealable judgment, persons who were members of permanently banned associations pursuant to the Act governing private associations, or persons who were members of unconstitutional parties. Personal aptitude requires legal capacity. It exempts feeble-minded persons, persons who are unable, due to personal circumstances, to store firearms and munitions safely and at risk of injuring themselves, persons registered in the juvenile delinquency records. In case the applicant provides insufficient documentation, he is required to provide physical or mental examinations at his own expense. The submissions of mental aptitude tests at the applicant's own expense are mandatory for all applicants under 25. Notwithstanding Germany enforcing high vetting standards to implement gun control, Germany still allows for ownership of a comprehensive range of firearms and weapons provided the examinations and background checks are passed by applicants.
Gun policy in the United Kingdom. The right to own arms in the UK is not guaranteed by law. As per Section 5 of the 1968 Firearms Act and its amendments, without the authority of Secretary of State, civilians are not allowed to possess or acquire weapons such as semi-automatic and automatic rifles, submachine guns and machine guns, self-loading and pump-action rifles, or handguns. Obtaining a gun license. Such licenses are granted by the local police to individuals who provide a good reason for owning a gun and prove not to pose a threat to public safety. They have to have a legitimate reason of the firearm for work, sport, or leisure, for example hunting or shooting practice. However, chief officers may exercise discretion over what constitutes a good reason. Furthermore, citizens also have to pass a background check concerning their mental health and their criminal records. For example, Ex-convicts who have been in prison for 3 years or longer may not obtain a gun license.
The first substantial restrictions of firearm and weapon ownership in Germany can be traced to the post-World War I era, when following the German defeat, a general ban on all civilian use of firearms that was stipulated in the Treaty of Versailles was implemented. The ban was ineffective, and after being amended in 1920 by restricting gun use further, the government gave up on effective disarmament of the populace in 1928. The government effected the law on firearms and ammunition, which allowed civilian possession, trade, dealings, and use of firearms, but required a separate permit for each with the aim of making gun ownership difficult and inconvenient. Under Nazi rule in 1938, the Nazi government effected the German Weapons Act. The act only applied to individuals deemed ethnically appropriate by the Nazi Party and lowered the legal age from 20 to 18. Extended permits, as well as lifting all firearm restrictions for party members and holders of annual hunting permits for everyone eligible. Following the German defeat in World War II, from 1945 to 1956, private firearm ownership was illegal until in 1956 restrictions were loosened. Different permits were required for different purposes, making the process complicated and difficult. In 1972, new legislation was passed as a response to domestic terrorism threats, streamlining weapons regulations as well as restricting ownership eligibility. The 1972 version of the Weapons Act was amended in 2002, which is the version in force today. The legislation went through slight modifications when it was amended as a response to the 2000 school shooting sprees in Germany. Following school shootings in Erfurt 2002, Amstetten 2006, and Winnenden in 2009, no major changes were made to gun legislation, as legislation was deemed strict enough. Leading German firearms experts rebuked calls for banning sports weapons, invoking Germany's restrictive gun laws and exhaustive vetting procedures. The consensus is that violent crimes and murders are committed with illegally obtained or illegally held weapons and firearms. German gun owners who go through the state's vetting procedures are extremely unlikely to commit offenses. When contemplating on the means of prevention of future killing sprees, the debate shifted towards issues involving the induction of violence into young people through media, as well as the lowering of inhibitions through ego shooter-style video games. Chancellor Merkel, in her speech on the matter, stated that the attacker's motives are incomprehensible and that he operated in a completely irrational way. This explains why, in the aftermath of shootings in German schools, legislation never went through substantial changes, denoting the attacker's actions as incomprehensible and unforeseeable means that changes in legislation will not help prevent future shootings due to the irrational nature. Merkel, in her speech, put the blame on the portrayal of violence in the media. She emphasized the negative effect ego shooter-style video games have on young people in reducing their inhibitions, echoing lawmakers' and field experts' opinions when she proceeded to defend shooting clubs as having traditional value and serving as community hubs. Shooting clubs aid the government in assessing their members' aptitude and abide by the Federal Weapons Act and state and local regulations. Among other prominent politicians, the governor of the state of Thuringia, where the most fatal shooting took place, echoed the chancellor's views and criticized politicians politicizing and using the event to push forward their political agendas.
A brief history of gun policy in the United Kingdom. The regulation on firearms has not always been this strict. Before the 1900s, more guns were legal, and the concept of licenses was not as developed. However, mass shootings in the past few decades have had a great impact on the restrictiveness of the law. Take for example the Hungerford massacre in 1987, which led to the ban of semi-automatic rifles. Or for example the Dunblane massacre in 1996, which led to the ban of handguns in the United Kingdom. Nowadays, the country stands as one of the most restrictive countries in terms of gun laws in the world.
After seeing both countries' legislations, let's see how they translate into statistical data. First, let's see how many civilian guns are out there in these two countries. In the UK, where there are strict gun control laws, there are approximately 3.3 million guns held by civilians, so around 5 guns per 100 people. In Germany, there are around 8 times more guns in civilian hands than in the UK, namely 26 million, which means 32 people have guns out of 100. Now let's look at how these numbers correlate with gun deaths. First, look at the following graph. This graph shows homicide rates from firearms measured as the number of deaths per 100,000. Germany has double the amount of homicides from firearms, but considering that the country has 8 times more guns, that means that on average they are using their guns less. These numbers might seem high, but if you had the United States or Mexico, the stats of Germany and the UK, they just get dwarfed. On the other hand, if you look at homicide rates just by themselves, the UK is only a little bit below Germany, so even though in the UK the homicides are not being done with firearms, it does not mean that they are not being done at all. If we look at number of suicide deaths by firearms, as you can see from this statistic, Germany has 4 times more suicide deaths by firearms than the UK. But if we go to suicide rates by themselves, the UK once again makes it up by other methods, which are not guns. So after seeing both of the very differing legislations in both countries, Germany being a country where guns are not that hard to obtain, and the UK with very, very strict gun laws, and looking at the statistical data from both countries, we saw that there is not a huge difference between the two countries, as the UK is quite close to Germany in both homicide and suicide rates. From this data, we came to the conclusion that allowing guns into civilian hands makes taking lives easier, but it does not make a huge difference in numbers in civilized Western European countries such as the Germany or UK.